Thank you.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. This is Michael Brohawn from ITM 21st, and thanks to everyone for taking time out of your busy day today to take part in our session, which is the last session of 2016. We'll be posting the first sessions of 2017 later in this week. We have some great sessions coming up for 2017, one of which I know you'll be interested in, which is going to be all about the changes that we can see coming down the road with the new administration, changes dealing with estate planning and financial planning. We'll have a nationally known attorney speaking about that in the month of February. But first today, some housekeeping. You should have received the handbook for today's session. If not, it's on the website under our Education tab, and that's at itm21st.com. That's itm21st.com. CE for today, as always, is 1 hour of CFP and 1 hour of CTFA, and also credit for FIRMA. FIRMA members get 1 hour of CE for their FIRMA credit. The CE form is on our website under this session info, and after the session, you can always find the forms in the education section on our website. They'll be listed in the blue box at the bottom of the page. Today, if you have any questions during the session, you can simply type it in. I will try to answer them along the way, but if it's something we're going to cover later, I may wait or have Leon wait. It could well be that we'll simply be asking questions at the end or answering questions at the end, but we'll see how it goes. But if you do have one, please do type it in on the screen when it comes up. Just a brief recap on 2016. We had 4,000 people register for courses this year, and of those 4,000, there were 1,200 individual people. So obviously, some attended a few different sessions, but I think it's pretty amazing that we had 1,200 individual people who took part, including more than 50 regulators on the state and federal level. We love the fact that we're providing good information to both our peers in the industry and also the regulators who are out there and you're dealing with on a daily basis, because information on life insurance is important for both. And we provided hundreds of hours of free CE this year, so it was a great year, and we appreciate all that took part, from the presenters to all of you who attended. The agenda today is packed. I'm going to talk a bit about the issues around life insurance as a trust asset, an asset that is getting even harder to deal with. Now, I will also talk about the relationships that are around life insurance trusts, and then Leon Wessels will walk through the meat of the presentation, the reason why you are here, and he will speak to the reasons why you may sever a TOLI relationship and then discuss the process of offloading a life insurance trust or a portfolio of life insurance trusts. Again, at any time, if you should have a question during the presentation, just type it into that spot on the screen. There is no doubt life insurance is more complex than it used to be. The hottest product today in the marketplace is called Indexed Universal Life. And this is a policy whose performance is tied to an index like the S&P 500. Now, most everyone on this call knows what the S&P 500 is. And if you were shown a life insurance policy whose cash value was tied to the S&P 500, and it assumed a 7% return on the as-sold illustration over the life of the policy, then you might think that this was somewhat aggressive but achievable. But if you really knew how this product worked, you would know that in order to obtain that 7% credited return as shown in the policy illustration, depending on policy design, you would actually have to get more like a 10 to 12% or more return in the S&P 500 index. Now, that's more than aggressive. It's probably not achievable. But agents in the marketplace are selling and trustees are accepting policies with these expectations. And they are doomed for failure. Why? Well, because many of the trustees do not have the in-house skills and knowledge to deal with a complex policy like this, an indexed universal life policy. And even those simpler policies like a plain vanilla current assumption universal life policy, which is driven by fixed interest rates, has tremendous issues these days. We've seen interest rates dropping for over a decade, and hopefully now they're bottoming out. But even if rates are, it will be a while before traditional universal life and whole life policies see some relief in their crediting rates. And over the last 18 months, we have seen cost increases in policies that more than doubled the carrying cost in some instances. I just wrote a blog about Northwestern Mutual, where they're in their whole life policies, they not only dropped their dividend rate for 2017, but they raised their cost in their whole life policies. And this is a very good company. All of those issues create the ultimate problem, which is lapsing policies. And if you do not have the requisite skills to be able to look ahead, you can find your clients very, very angry when this issue sneaks up on them without you providing even a warning. And as we'll talk about in a second, this can and will lead to litigation, as more firms are finding out. On your screen is just one example of what I'm talking about. This is from our blog about a price increase at Transamerica, and it features a policy that we were reviewing that had a cost of insurance increase of about 40%. Now, we saw policies with cost increases of up to 500%. So this is not even the largest of the cost increases we saw, but this 40% increase raised the funding needed on the policy to get to maturity by more than double. Being able to look inside the policy and show the client why funding had to increase, and also show all of the options that they might have, was needed in this situation. And that's not an easy thing to do, but something that a trustee needs to be able to do or get someone to do for them. If you're managing an asset that could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, even millions of dollars, you need to be able to manage it in a way that maximizes the value to the beneficiary. That is your job as a trustee. And I will agree that that's not easy. And unfortunately, litigation is increasing everywhere. An interesting article in Estate Planning magazine I saw a while back, a few months back, pointed out that many in our industry, the estate planning industry, believe that over the next 10 to 15 years there will be an onslaught of litigation by trust beneficiaries caused by these issues that we just pointed out. Because this asset the trustees were charged with safeguarding had lapsed or in some fashion become worthless. It's obviously an issue for the beneficiaries, but it's also a great concern for TOLI trustees. One thing that I always tell trustees is that even though most of the issues we have talked about so far revolve around the policy, that is, low interest rates, cost increases, dividend drops, etc., usually the biggest issues we have are the people issues. Grantors who are hard to connect with, hard to contact, hard to deal with. These are the real problems, and the fact that an irrevocable trust is a lifelong asset, but the trust goals will change, can change over time, makes it much, much harder to deal with this asset and this trust. We all know this. Second and even third marriages, money or drug or alcohol issues with beneficiaries, these are things that change the reasons for and the goals around the trust. Not to mention the estate tax changes that Leon will talk about. And these issues, again, can help to create a litigious situation. So the issues are all around us for life insurance policies and life insurance trusts. Now let me hand it over to Leon Wessels for the rest of the session.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Can you hear me all right, Mike?
Sounds great, Leon.
Okay, great. So just to kind of pick up where Mike left off, was we all know that there are certainly changes in the works in terms of estate taxes, which is historically has driven the need and the use of trustees for irrevocable life insurance trusts. So as we look back at 2001 to 2015, as you can see on the screen, the estate tax returns filed in 2001 of 110 filed, and $24 billion in estate tax liability. So flashing that forward to 2015, you can see that there were 11,000 estate tax returns filed, 5,000 taxable returns, and the estate tax liability on those was $18 billion. So while the numbers of actual returns filed have dropped off, clearly we can see that the actual tax liability has increased. So looking, let's go back, just looking at what we've seen so far from what the Trump plan is putting out, is that they'll repeal the death tax, but capital gains that are held until death and valued over $10 million would be subject to tax or exempt for small businesses and family farms. So to prevent the abuse and contributions of appreciated assets into a private charity that is established by a decedent or decedent's relatives will be disallowed. So we're going to see some changes on the horizon as it relates to estate taxes. Again, we've seen a trend since 2001 that's been pretty clear, and I think many of you who serve as trustee today have experienced that. You've seen a lot of your clients who have the smaller trusts. I can flash back to 2001, 2002 when we first started our business, and it wasn't uncommon to see irrevocable trusts with a $350,000 or $500,000 or $750,000 of total death benefit in those accounts. And so again, as we look back at the actual estate tax exemptions, I think it's important to note that these date back to 1916, so basically 100 years. Some form of tax on the wealthy or tax on estates has existed. It's gone up and down, and over the years, many of those trends or tendencies have been up and not down. And so as we go into this next administration, many of us, kind of want the fact that that we can pass on the family farm or the business in some of our states without taxation, but I think it would be foolish of us to think that they will be gone forever. As you can see right here, the maximum estate tax rates, again, going back to 1916, has been as low as 10% up to as high as 77% back in the 60s and 70s. And then again, as reform took place over the last 25 years, you can see where the actual tax rates have gone down. At one point in time, they were actually repealed. I think if everyone recalls that, I think one of the noteworthy stories of that era was the owner of the Yankees happened to die in December, I think, of 2010 or 2011, which was the last possible chance to have an estate that was not taxable under the federal estate tax provision. So again, to think that these will be gone forever, I think it'd be foolish to go there. So while we have life insurance in place today for a number of reasons, we certainly know that, you know, one of the key reasons of using life insurance is the leverage. It's the ability to create liquidity upon someone's death. So we don't always know what an individual's liquidity is going to look at the date or the time of their death. If their wealth or their investments or their net worth is tied up in illiquid assets, then certainly life insurance will continue to play a role. So I wouldn't plan on going out after January 20th and we see the new tax plan from Trump and tell people they don't need their ILITs. I don't think that's a responsible approach, but you're going to want to understand your clients and what those needs are. So today what I'd like to do is maybe just take a look at, you know, what some of the key contributing factors are of when and why and how to move your ILITs. And when I was thinking about this earlier, the quick answer, and we could wrap this session up, is, you know, why move them is because you can, and when to move them, you know, how about now? It kind of makes it a short story. But so let's talk today about what some of the contributing factors are that I see that Mike Brohawn and those of us that have been working in this space for the last 16 years have come to understand as we have dealt with a number of situations. So first, let's maybe look at, I listed out 8 items. So I'm going to kind of go through each 8 of these kind of headings and then kind of talk a little bit about some of the underlying issues or subdivision of those 8 areas. So the first is really, who is the trustee today? And I know today when I looked at the registration list, there's a wide variety of people in attendance. Some of you are from smaller organizations that may have 10 or 12 or 15 ILITs. Some of you are mid-sized with 50 to a couple hundred, and some of you are from very large corporate fiduciary or banks or trust companies. And then once you actually look at the size of these portfolios, it certainly does make a difference in how you approach them, what kind of resources you have available. We also look at, you know, what's the underlying business that you're in? Are you a specialty trust company? Are you one that exists to service your advisors, your financial advisors, your brokers? Are you there because you're part of an insurance company and you issue life insurance and your agents need places to put ILITs? So again, as you break that down, maybe some of you are with a family office organization, which we're going to touch on a little bit today because I see that as an emerging market, and I actually think that, you know, over the next 3 to 5 years, a lot of this business that we're looking and talking about today will actually be more in the family office space. So when we look at who is the trustee, you know, one of the things, the second thing I look for or I ask about is, you know, do you have centralized administration? And it really does make a difference. And I know going back, again, you know, 8, 10, 12 years, there was not a lot of central administration that occurred around insurance trusts. You know, and again, putting ILITs in perspective, they really do exist at the bottom of the hierarchy of, you know, of assets that are held in trust. I don't know of too many organizations that go out and look for ILITs as a part of their business, but they've been an accommodation to something, or they exist because of potential roll-up or an acquisition of another organization. But when you look at the centralized administration, it tells me a lot about the current status of an organization and whether or not they really have the ability to put controls over the administration and the procedures that need to be practiced with insurance trusts. In the lack of centralized administration, frankly, it's chaos. It wasn't too long ago I was meeting with a group that had about 115 different advisors within their organization that were each handling the administration of 2 or 3 or 4 accounts. And so, you know, when I look at that, I know that that's very much a hands-on type organization. It's probably tied to a larger relationship with these clients. But the unfortunate side of that is those individuals may not experience all that they need to understand or experience as we see today. There's a lot of moving parts in the trust-owned life insurance environment. So they may not understand when and how to do certain things that when you've scaled out a back office and when you're dealing with repetition, that you have the ability to experience more than you would just in 2 or 3 or 4 transactions a year. Again, that kind of relates to the skills and experience of the trustee. Do they possess, you know, the underlying skills that are required? And again, I don't profess to have near the knowledge of life insurance as I did 15 years ago. Thanks to people like Michael Brohawn and Aaron Hansen and other people within our organization that lend specific expertise to various product types and where the markets are going and what's happening inside some of these policies. You know, it takes a pretty diverse group of insurance-related people to truly handle any type of scale or large volume of ILITs. So the skills and the experience a lot of times are lacking. And again, I go into some of the shops out there. I've been out to some of you, and you got 15 or 20 or 25 ILITs, and you know, you probably understand the differences between the term and some of the other types of products. But when it comes to really being on the cutting edge and understanding the changes and how to mitigate potential liability, that sometimes starts without you ever having any idea that that clock has started to tick, really comes down to being able to be exposed to a lot of volume in a lot of different situations. Whether or not trust officers and trust advisors are involved in the ILIT tells me a lot about an organization. And whether or not you have a high touch with the client, but then also the downside of that is that a lot of the trust officers and trust advisors that I've met really are true professionals. They understand their profession. They understand how to manage other assets, and insurance trusts are kind of the negative side of their job description. And so maybe, you know, one would think that they're applying their skills and their profession towards other more meaningful and revenue-generated assets would be maybe more appropriate. Understanding the second item I want to get into is really knowing the clients. I mean, who is your client? We often deal with the patriarchs of these trusts, or the grantors, as we know them, or the insureds within those policies. Rarely do we interact or interface with the beneficiaries. And some of us have learned the hard lesson over the years that the true beneficiary, the true client of the trust, the individual with legal standing is the beneficiaries, not the grantors of the trust. And in fact, the IRS in their crummy ruling essentially is taken the position that in these particular trusts, once the insurance has been applied for and the trust has been created, that the grantor is to have no incidence of ownership going forward. And so, yet we allow them to at times dictate terms and tell us how and when and where and so on of the ongoing administration and management of these accounts. It is a fine line, and we understand that, but I think many of us have forgotten that our clients are really the ones that are unspoken, those that we don't communicate with sometimes ever. One of the things that dawned on me, just kind of a side note, when I first started doing this, is, again, not knowing near what we know today, I always thought it was kind of crazy. You could go, you know, have a bank account, have a relationship with a local banker, and, you know, if you got married and open up an account to give you a toaster or something. And today, I mean, we have ILIT relationships, and I used to joke with some of them saying that you think that when you kind of get to the end stage of an ILIT that you'd like start sending out a postcard or perhaps some toasters to the beneficiaries of these ILITs, and just letting them know that you're there and that you're tuned in to what their needs are going to be. One of the things that's difficult, of course, with an insurance trust is that you've got the asset tied to a person's insurability. So understanding what their health issues may be, understanding, you know, whether or not how to fund a policy wrapped around what's their life expectancy. Are we overfunding the trust? Are we underfunding the trust? You know, the perfect insurance trust is actually one where, you know, the day that we file for those proceeds from the insurance company, we have, you know, $1 or less of cash value in that policy, but yet did not overspend in premiums because of the increasing cost of insurance over the years of the span of those contracts. So once again, knowing who the clients are, and that's a key element in understanding whether you should or should not be considering keeping or moving your insurance trusts out. The third item that I look at that really contributes to this area, to this conversation today, is the trust document itself. And about 6 or 7 years ago, we decided to experiment with getting more involved in the ongoing administration, in being the back office or partnering with some of the trustees out there. And one of the early components or activities that we engaged in was actually reviewing the trust agreement. So, you know, we would use our own in-house counsel or experts from within the industry on a contract basis that would, you know, be tasked with reviewing the trust documents. And I can remember a couple of the comments that came back from some of those folks, and that, you know, you think that the legal community would have put out a template that would be universally accepted on ILITs, because some of these range from 10 pages to over 200 pages, and really, each one of these is a creation of their own, and does require, you know, an in-depth review. So, you know, have your trust documents been thoroughly reviewed? Who has the authority to remove and appoint a trustee? Are there special trustee requirements? Is there capital requirements, location, service centers, etc.? You know, are the funds going to be distributed immediately upon death, or can these funds be retained for further management? Another item that I look at are the trust fees. Are your fees in line? Are you charging on average at least $1,500 per trust? And if not, why not? One of the things I've experienced is that less than 3% of these clients leave when fee increases, reasonable fee increases, are introduced. So, you know, one of the analogies I have, and as a matter of fact, I had a conversation with an organization yesterday, a fairly large one, and they were commenting about how anytime they try to make a fee increase, you know, these people come out of the woodwork and they're complaining. You know, it's like, isn't it crazy that, you know, we try to charge $1,500 a year to be the trustee of an asset that has no current value to us as the trustee. There's really no upside whatsoever, and yet we're carrying this $2 million on average of life insurance death benefit proceeds that in the future we intend this to go into the trust or paid out to the beneficiaries, and they're complaining about $120 a month in fees. They spend more than that on Netflix, their cell phone bill, their cable bill, but yet they come out of their skin when we as professionals try to charge them a reasonable fee to be the caretaker of an asset that could multiply in value and hopefully, you know, the $2 million on average in value. So, do you have a standardized fee schedule for your ILITs? If not, you need to consider that. That's something that I think many of you took that initiative under task over the last 10 years. Most of you today do have standardized fee schedules. And one of the things that I see in a lot of them, however, today are too many exceptions. It seems to me that concessions can very easily be made on the fee schedule or for an ILIT fee, depending on the relationship. And one of the fallacies of that is when the other assets leave, or if your trust officer or your investment manager leaves and the client leaves with the rest of their assets, they leave the ILIT behind, and you're sitting there without a fee for the ILIT services, and unable usually to get rid of that ILIT very easily. When was the last time that you've raised your fees? Are you charging the termination fee? So, for example, this is one that we introduced a few years ago, made some suggestions. A number of you took us up on that, and you have actually implemented a termination provision in your fee schedule that would allow you at your discretion to charge up to 1 or 2% of the trust value once the death benefits have been collected, and use that in a way to retain those assets under management if at all possible. But what it does more than anything is it gives the beneficiaries a reason to pause. And one thing we have learned about beneficiaries, at least in this generation, is they all think they're smarter than mom and dad, and they certainly all have a lot of eager advisors willing to step to the plate and help them out when mom and dad pass. So we want to try to give them reason to pause, to leave those assets under management for a period of time, perhaps a 2-year minimum, 50% of the death benefit to stay under management with you for a 2-year period would allow you to relax or waive those termination fees. But putting them in there certainly does give them reason to consider your services and continuing the relationship. Do you collect past due fees? Are you accruing them? Are you putting them on the books and trying to take them out at, when the grantors die? Are you trying to collect them? Again, I find a whole variety of you out there that if they don't pay, and you just kind of move on, get along. But again, tracking the past due fees could be a very significant windfall of revenue at a certain event, whatever type of event, whether it be the distribution of funds, the trust closing, or if you decide you're going to move some of your ILITs to a successor trustee, that can factor into that. Do you take loans out of the cash value to bring those policies, to cover your trustee fees? So if there is a cash value within a policy, are you allowed to take a loan against that policy, then disclose out to the beneficiaries and the grantors the impact of taking that loan because they failed to pay the fee? Do you make ILIT fee concessions for large relationships, for friends, for retired bank executives, et cetera? And again, putting kind of a hook in that at the end so that if other assets leave or the relationship changes, that you have the ability to begin charging a reasonable fee for your services. So what happens to the fees when the desired assets have left? And again, that's kind of what I've seen occur a lot in the last 7 or 8 years. As I recall back to one of my very, very early clients who was a local bank in Northeast Iowa that was then acquired by a bank out of Illinois, that was then acquired by a bank out of Tennessee, that was then acquired by ultimately the bank today, which is a much larger bank. And so essentially the administration of these accounts over those four transactions changed twice. But what I found is a lot of those original clients that we had kind of here in Northeast Iowa no longer banked with that bank. They were back to working with somebody local. And so my question was, how do you, if you've been part of those organizations where you've rolled these up and you've acquired other organizations, a lot of the other more desirable assets are run off and you end up with the ILIT, how do you deal with those? And when is a good time to address that? And hopefully today we'll provide a few thoughts about that. The operations is number 5. Are you scaling the operation? Do you really have internal administrators, or as the example earlier, are you using your high-end, high-dollar people, your trust officers and trust advisors to do this work? Those are things that need to be considered. Are you using outside vendors for systems or policy reviews? And I do know that one of the kind of the vacuums that caused us to address this service that we provide today at ITM 21st was that most of the trust accounting and system providers out there really never accounted for insurance trusts, and they would show up on your system as as one unit. One unit of what? And maybe it would list the policy number of the carrier, but rarely were you able to manage or understand what the ultimate values, the cash values, the premiums, the total death benefit amounts were within those core systems that almost all trust organizations utilize. The other side of that is vendors, and again, we kind of fit into that vendor mold when we broke into this business in 2001. And vendors, I think we've all emerged. So the variety of vendors that are available out there vary from just kind of doing, very simple policy reviews to assist you in understanding what the challenges are or the opportunities are within a given insurance policy that's held in a trust, to maybe evolve to where the services that ITM 21st now provides, which is kind of a full back office partnership. So we've seen the vendor services evolve. We've seen a washout, hopefully, of vendors that are really out there to sell insurance. We know that's a conflict of interest. We know the OCC guide handbook clearly states that to have these reviews done is not to be done by somebody who has the ability to sell insurance. So we've seen the vendor potential out there and filling those gaps with a variety of services. So, from an operations standpoint, if you're not really scaling it, if you don't have those in-house talent, you don't have the in-house insurance experts, and some of the vendors will come in and backfill some of those. But then you start looking at the cost. So the cost of the vendor now is added to your own internal expense and cost of administering the ILIT, and pretty soon you find yourself in the red and not in the black. Are your policies and procedures up to date? That's another big one that I think, again, we've seen a lot of movement, a lot of positive movement, where a lot of the chief fiduciary officers and compliance officers are starting to wrap their arms around this. I think some of the regulators are driving this, but again, I think it's more of a just check the box type of a situation. But having policies and procedures up to date, and it's interesting how many times we as a company have changed our procedures. It has been radical at times because of just changes in how carriers, are paying dividends, whether their COIs are going up or down, what the term conversion landscape looks like, the variable contracts. And so index contracts, as Mike illustrated earlier, anything that changes out there on the insurance industry side really does warrant at least an amendment or an addendum to your policies and procedures. So kind of getting into the crux of it now, number 6 and number 7 is the fiduciary liability. And I think this will drive many of you in terms of trying to answer that question is, why, when, and how should I look at my ILIT book of business? I think the fiduciary liability side by far is the #1 reason to take a closer look at it. Understanding what it is another story. So to understand, what that really adds up to, what are we looking at in terms of liability, is not always an easy answer, by the way. When you look at what comes to mind for me is a conversation I've had recently with actually one of our clients, and they've got a good number of accounts that are actually, under a Delaware provision. So we know that trusts in Delaware have some favorable attributes as far as the trustee is concerned, also to some of the trust holders. But in the world of ILITs, it really allows the trustee to take more of a distant approach to what's required of them in terms of the asset management. And when you start unraveling that and you try to look at the operations and what is the real need. So bear with me for a moment if I walk you through an example of, if we've got a full-service ILIT where you are responsible for, getting out your gift letters, getting communication from the insurance carriers, your premium notices, getting your gift letters out, collecting the funds in, depositing the funds, sending out your crummy letters, and then ultimately paying the premium, hopefully before the policy's gone into the grace period or lapsed. That's kind of the 4 core areas of administering the ILIT. Beyond that, for most of us, you have the responsibility of managing the asset. So if the investment is a variable contract, variable universal life, you've got to constantly be monitoring whether the current funding stream is adequate to carry that coverage to the expected need date or the date of death. And we know that that's a moving target with the underlying asset allocation. It's a moving target as it relates to the COIs and internal costs and expenses. So, but if we're geared up for that, which I think many of the vendors and most of the trustees have accepted that over the years, yet I totally understand why we would want to utilize favorable provisions from various states to protect us as a company. But when you transition that service, for example, if we take a full service account and we move it to a directed status, I have to understand is that as trustee, you're still the address of record, you're still the policy owner. So any changes, any modifications, any requests for information need to roll through you, typically, unless you're the advisor or the agent involved that actually sold the insurance. So a good proportion of these accounts are going to be orphaned accounts. The advisor is no longer active, and so any request for service must come through you. So now if we back off on what we're responsible for, now we basically become a wholesaler or clearinghouse handling all kinds of random requests for, can you get me this illustration? Can you tell me how long the policy will run if I pay this premium? Can you tell me, can I reduce the death benefit? Can I convert the policy? Now essentially you're becoming, again, that place where you're having to deal with all the client and advisor related issues, because you're the only one who has the authority to contact the carrier because you're the policy owner. So until we can create some workarounds to that, sometimes taking, protection under some of the Uniform Trust Code and some of the special state provisions is not necessarily an easy task, especially if you're a smaller organization. In the account I was talking about earlier is a large one. So, finding that sweet spot where we can deliver services that still protect the trustee under those state provisions, as well as provide the service without incurring more expense in the process, is something that is important, and that I'm sure we will accomplish. So looking at the fiduciary liability, again, one of the things that I try to use as an illustration is I've often said that the ILITs are a quagmire. And I'm not sure I understand totally what the definition of quagmire is, but to me, it is an irrevocable life insurance trust. It's an instrument created by someone of wealth who is doing it on an irrevocable basis. They agreed to be underwritten and ultimately issued an insurance policy that goes into the trust. An independent is named as trustee, so the bank or trust company or attorney or CPA or advisor is named the trustee, who now has to send you a letter every year asking you, begging you to send the money in so that they can ultimately pay the premium. And if you do send in the money, now the trustee is off the hook. They can actually send out a letter before they pay the premium, offering these people, they have no idea who they are, the beneficiaries, that they have the right to withdraw the funds and the present day value of that gift. And if they don't take you up on the opportunity to withdraw it, now you can pay the premium. And again, to me, it's a very difficult position to be in as a trustee. And while the whole time we're doing this, we're making maybe what, $750, $1,000, $1,500, maybe $2,000 or $2,500 per year for our services, and the death benefit of that policy is $2 million. We're going to get into some of the dynamics and defining what a trust-owned life insurance policy is in a minute, but we carry this liability for years for very little in return. And we also know that when we get to the end and these trusts fund out, that the beneficiaries are more likely to run with the money than to leave it with us and let us to professionally manage it. So the fiduciary liability, the ongoing challenges around these accounts, on the surface, they look harmless. There's no cash. There's no meaningful asset there. There's nothing to really wrap your arms around except the fact that it's this death benefit, this future value that we're trying to protect, that if we happen to mess up and lose it, the only way we can get it back is if the insured is still insurable. And as we know that these ILITs are typically used on the older population, the likelihood of them being there and insurable again is probably not too likely. So moving on here to number 7 is the business case. So, are ILITs critical to your business? So for those of you who are represented by trust companies, where your primary function is serving as like a family office, or you're servicing FAs or RIAs or other advisors, then ILITs are probably pretty important to your organization, and I get it. In fact, in many of those instances, you have to put additional protections in place simply because they are core to some other meaningful business, so that we can avoid or diffuse any potential conflicts of interest or self-dealing aspects, because if we're the issuing insurance carrier, we're also the trust company, we're also the agent. So if we're all wrapped up into one nice little warm, fuzzy relationship, we have to make sure that we've got all of our I's dotted and T's crossed. If you're not one of those, then ILITs are probably not core to your business, and the question is, why do you have them? And I've asked that question a lot lately, and a lot of people shake their head. They don't necessarily know. And it's not an indictment on anybody, because I know that these don't get a lot of attention. I know ILITs rarely come up. They're not a part of your regular meetings unless A, you're being sued, or somebody lapsed a policy, or B, it's a $20 million trust that just funded out and you were lucky enough to keep the assets under management. Other than that, ILITs are kind of unspoken. So looking at the business case, I mean, can we build a business case around them? Are they important to us in our environment? If they're not, then we should take steps to identify, a way to move them. In light of everything else we've already talked about today, in light of what Mike has shared with you about the complexities, what we've talked about in terms of estate taxes, what we talked about in these previous 6 or 7 headers of elements of various degrees of involvement or challenges as a trustee, we really need to look at what the business case is for us personally as an organization. Are they meaningful? And then last is what's the upside and what's the downside. So what I want to do now that I've bored you to death with these 2 slides for 20 minutes is get a little bit more interactive here and go into looking at what we have identified as the snapshot of a irrevocable life insurance trust and the snapshot of a trust-owned life insurance policy. So with several thousand of these types of transactions over the years and annually, we've been able to really pin this down to these numbers that you see on the screen. We know that there's 1.7 grantors/insureds for each of these trusts. We know there's 1.4 policies per trust. The average age currently is 65.54 years of age. We know that the average published trustee fee today is just about $1,250. I could argue that either way, up or down, depending on where you're located and what type of organization, but overall I'd say $1,250 is the average. The average life expectancy of these insureds is 18.45 more years. The average death benefit is 1.8 million. The average policy age, in other words, how long has this trust been in force? So there was the Leon Wessels Irrevocable Life Insurance Trust dated XYZ. It would be 13.81 years into, on average, the trust that we have today in our system. The average premium is $23,800. The average trust duration overall is 32 years. The average cash value is $219,000, and we have 3.11 beneficiaries average per trust. So that's the trust side. Let's look at the individual policies. 56% of them are universal life, 28% are whole life, 5% are term, 12.5% are variable, 5.6% are blended, so it would be your whole life term blends, and then your survivor joint life of 35.5%. The policy risk ratings, again, what we've done is applied a rating what we believe would be indications of potential liability to a trustee. It is our opinion, it's our methodology, it's what we've created to really try to flag in advance so that we could help you identify when there are issues. We know that today 45% are rated A, which are very, very good. 19 or 20% is rated B. We get in the middle, it's 12% on our C ratings, and then we have our high-risk areas of D, F, and unable to rates. And again, this averages 22.5% by policy. So when we look at kind of the remediation side, so we'll take a little bit broader picture and say, you know, if you're the trustee today, what we can tell you, if I were coming in, you gave me a number of trusts and a number of policies, I could reverse engineer that and come up with these types of statements. 27.7% of your policies are projected to lapse prior to maturity or life expectancy of the insured. 11% of these will lapse prior to life expectancy. I'm sorry, let me back up. The first one is prior to maturity. That's the contract maturity. So if the policy is, you know, it matures at age 100 or 110 or 120, or if it's a life pay 95, that's what my maturity reference is there. So a third of them essentially will lapse before the contract actually expires. 11% will lapse prior to life expectancy. 30% of all no-lapse guaranteed provisioned policies have already been compromised. So we know that was the big trend, that was the big move over the last 6-7 years. Cash-rich whole life contracts were being traded in for these no-lapse guaranteed contracts. What we know is that 30% of those have already been compromised. So 18% of older policies that have only 18% of the older contracts, these would be contracts issued probably prior to 1990, 1985, 1990. Very small percentage actually have extended maturity provisions. So if it's one of these insureds, and we've dealt with a few of these the last couple of years, they're quite a lot of fun, where the person is still alive at age 100 and this contract expires at age 101, or actually 100 and 364 days, and it's going to pay the cash value of the contract. And if it's a UL contract and you have no cash value, your last quarterly premium might have been $200,000 on a $2 million policy, and if they live one day longer than they should, then you get zero basically back for death benefit. So, and 53% of those are for cash value. So even of the 18 to 20% that have the provisions now where the carriers are honoring an extended provision, only half of those are really for cash value, not the death benefit. 6% have old tobacco ratings on them. Nobody's bothered to see if they quit smoking or stop chewing. 7% have substandard ratings. Nobody's really bothered to check to see if their health has changed. 7% have loans that are crippling the policy, which is very much a no-no unless it's part of the design of the trust. And 22% have discontinued paying premiums altogether. One of the things that ties into that, if they're not paying premiums, if they're not making a gift to the trust, are they paying your fee? And if they're not paying your trustee fee, then the question is really why do you even want the ILIT? Let's just take a snapshot of kind of I pulled together a variety of data from sources where we've reviewed the trust portfolios, and I've pulled together a collage of this that built what is kind of the typical, so I'm not reporting on any one individual organization. So a regional / national bank, which is really where we're going to focus, our efforts in educating and servicing and providing consulting in the next couple of years, is that I do believe in the next 3 to 5 years that the majority of the ILITs that are with large national and regional banks are no longer going to be there. There's really no reason for them to be there. They don't really meet the litmus test of being for wealth management. A $1 million death benefit doesn't cut it anymore. If it's not 20 or 30 or 50 million that's in an ILIT, then it's probably not something you're going to want to keep. So when I look at the averages here, I see an average of 704 ILITs, 879 policies, $1 billion of total death benefit. So if this is an organization that has grown over the last 15 years by acquisition or merger, I can tell you that a majority of this business is not core to that organization. I can tell you that they have very few relationships with those individuals. Again, you throw in a mix of states in terms of the ability to use an investment advisor or directed accounts, 70% of these, the trustee has sole authority, 20% they have no authority, and 10% they have joint authority. So again, we've got another complexity here as to how we're going to manage this, how are we going to scale this, do our people understand what that means. So again, another contributing factor to some of the headaches with ILITs. On average, we know that 40% of these are relationship accounts and 60% are standalone, which means they have no other meaningful business with the organization. Look at the trusts and policies. 17% of the trusts are typically in small trusts with total value of less than $500,000. 34% of the policies that we see are considered high risk. In this example, $367 million of very, very high risk fiduciary liability in an average portfolio of an average regional or national bank, and you don't have meaningful relationship with almost half of them. So again, the question why, I think this kind of lends to the answer of why you may want to get rid of your ILITs. So let's look at the trustee fees. Average portfolio like that's bringing in, the published fees are $1,250 to $1,500. The actual is about $600,000. So again, a big difference between what's published and what's collected. And when you take a look at what you're currently should be doing in terms of your back office, your support, your management of the ILITs, or actually what we would tell you if you outsource those, this is the multiplier I would apply to your portfolio. This tells me and our team what we would have to be doing if we stepped in, took these 700 accounts, 879 policies on your behalf. It means I'm dealing with 2,394 beneficiaries. I have 880 policies. And again, when I did this calculator, I just entered in the number of trusts and it auto-calculated all the rest of these figures for us based on our experience. 479 trusts that have grantors who are actually still paying premiums. We have 600 policies that you have to process premium payments on. You'll have 35 policies that you'll have to process payments more often than annual, like monthly or quarterly. 225 trusts that have grantors no longer gifting to pay the premium. 282 policies that we'd have to review because no premium payments are being made. You have to understand, is the policy going to lapse? How much longer will it run? If it won't make it to life expectancy, do we need to cut down the death benefit? Do we need to send letters to beneficiaries telling them we need your support? What do we need to do? So again, it creates additional work. So 4,224 pieces of incoming mail would be projected on that portfolio, 3,802 outgoing pieces of mail, 739 premium notices, 556 gift or premiums to be processed, 1,866 crummy letters, 352 hours spent on the phone with insurance carriers, 352 hours spent on the phone with other administrative tasks, and 141 hours processing deposits. So when you look at now into the remediation, what does it take for your experts to fix the issues within the portfolio? We project that 265 policies need immediate remediation. 38 policies will lapse in less than a year. 99 will lapse in less than 5 years. 177 will lapse in 5 to 15. 158 will lapse greater than 15. And again, I just kind of go on down the list here, but as you can see, there's a considerable investment of time in administering ILITs. I'm going to flip through so I don't run out of time. You know, when you look at your internal cost of administration, it's very significant. You got your core salaries and benefits of an employee, but you got all of the other charges that are associated with every employee within any large organization, percentage of accounting and legal and compliance, et cetera. So the cost of having these is very significant. The upside, you know, if you put all the numbers down, you're making $20,000 to $200,000 a year in fee revenue off your ILITs. Downside is you got $1 billion of potential liability. So let's just talk a little bit about if you want to have these kind of a custom report put together, we will analyze this. We'll provide you a report. Again, it's not sales. It's just a pure consulting. I'll run it through the system. We'll give you an idea of what you've got. But if you want to know what you have, these are the types of questions you should be asking or the information you should be providing under a non-disclosure agreement. And then asking some of the questions, you know, is it core to my business? And again, I'm going to skip right forward. I just realized I'm running out of time. So how do we get rid of ILITs? There's been a pretty significant movement lately where we have gone in to either in part or in whole work with existing trustees to move their accounts out. There's a couple of solutions, and I'm going to again skip forward to the most common is to resign as trustee. I've seen this for years. We know that that comes with a long tail of liability. If you don't know the client and you don't have a one-on-one relationship with them, and you try to resign, as soon as they go try to find a successor trustee, they realize they can't find one. They're really angry. They become adversarial. They stick their head in the sand, and you chase them now for 2 years, and you're still on the hook. Even though you have resigned per the document, no one has been named a successor, so you're still responsible to a certain degree. So they become very painful to just resign and walk away. What I would prefer to do today, if I were any trustee and I had some or all my ILITs, I would want to move them either by decanting the small trust or dissolving them, turning the policies over to the beneficiaries of the trust, perhaps talking to them about other needs they may have, like long-term care or convalescent care, health care, but a lot of these smaller trusts probably can just be dissolved unless they're part of a special needs account. But really kind of get to the meat of it here, there's 2 ways to do it. Really kind of 3 ways to do it. One is to do a bulk transfer, and a bulk transfer will allow the ability for one institution to take over the accounts of another. It does require cooperation from the local banking authority, so the various state department of banking may be involved in that. It's not that difficult. If it's approved, you can bulk transfer over with a negative consent notification to those account holders. If a bulk transfer is not in the cards, then we can do it under another method called an agency agreement, and actually one that works is a purchase agreement, whether it be for $1 or more. Successor trustee or potential successor trustee acquires some or all of your book of business under a purchase agreement with the idea that we will individually repaper those accounts over a period of time. So we identify a period of 6 months, a year, 18 months, 3 years, whatever the case may be, depending on where they're all located, the complexity of it, the number of accounts, but we would operate under an agency agreement from day one where the successor trustee is assuming the responsibilities of those accounts as we move those accounts over through a tri-party agreement where the grantors are going to release and accept the resignation of you, the trustee, and then also accept and appoint the successor trustee in a tri-party agreement. Regardless of where you're at, there are solutions for this that are much better than just simply resigning as trustee. I will tell you that there's a lot of activity going on here. We've been involved in several thousand of these. over the last couple of years, and we think this trend is going to continue in light of the federal or state tax changes, the increased fiduciary liability, and just the lack of interest or revenue for the typical trustee. So with that, and again, I didn't spend a lot of time on that. Unfortunately, I chewed it up earlier, but we have several strategic partners that we work with. So it's not ITM 21st that's doing this. We're simply a party to that. We help accommodate it if it's involving any of our strategic partners. But we do have a handful of strategic partners that will gladly have those discussions. Those are independent organizations. They're not anybody that's going to threaten your underlying relationship. So in some cases, we move the ILITs, but the relationship stays with the current trust advisor for the other assets under management. Again, there's a variety of ways to resolve these issues and to help you if ILITs are not core to your business. So, Mike, I think if you want to just open it up if we have any questions.
Well, I have one question that came in. Somebody was asking that you mentioned that you recommend that the individual who reviews these policies should or should not be licensed to sell policies, and I can answer that. It's not a question of whether or not the person is licensed to sell these policies. What really Leon is referring to is if you go to page 37 of the unique and hard to value asset put out by the OCC, they speak to the fact that a bank fiduciary must understand each life insurance policy, and if they don't and they hire someone or employ an advisor, that advisor must be qualified, independent, objective, and not affiliated with an insurance company to prudently manage these assets. Now, there are life insurance agents out there, obviously, that can help you if you're replacing a policy, but really what we're speaking to there is if somebody's quote-unquote managing, so they have a platform or they have the ability to manage your policies, you know, they can't be affiliated with a life insurance policy. So that answers that question. There are no other questions that came in, but one thing I would ask Leon, so if somebody if a trustee is looking at 2017 and they're thinking, well, I've got 100 policies that are in 60 trusts, and you know, 40 of them are people I haven't spoken to in 3 years, what is the first step that they would go through if they were interested in trying to move any of these policies or trusts?
I think the first thing you need to do is have somebody analyze that portfolio. I mean, so some of the work that we do, we'll take a look at it. We'll ask you which ones are relationship accounts, which ones are standalones. We'll try to ask a lot of those core questions we asked earlier about, you know, what state are they in? Is this a special needs trust? Are they paying fees? Are they not paying fees? And then we'll put together an action plan. So some of those may include the fact that if you're only going to keep 10 of the 50, that you move them all to a successor trustee with the understanding that those 10 relationships, you know, remain with you for other purposes if you have other assets under management and you don't want to be bogged down with administering 10 accounts. Now you really don't know how to administer an ILIT because you're only dealing with 10 a year. So you have ongoing relationships. So back to Mike's question, get them reviewed, get an analysis done, have somebody lay out what the pros, the cons, the recommendations, the comments, and understanding what's unique about your book of business. And again, I mean, it's all over the board, but I will say that the ability to move them exists today. That there are a couple specialty organizations that will take them. I'm not sure that will always be the case.
Well, thank you, Leon. We have no other questions coming in. I wanted to let everybody know that we will be placing on the website the first few sessions for 2017. One of the first sessions we're having in 2017 is going to be an interesting one. Those of you, I just mentioned the OCC handbook. Those of you who deal with the OCC know there is something called a Reg 9 review. Our first session in 2017 is going to be for clients only. It's going to be interactive, and at that session we're going to be reviewing a system that we're putting together, and we would like to have your help in putting it together to make that process easier for you, our clients. So we're hoping that in 2017, just like this session today, if you're interested in offloading ILITs, this helps to solve your problem. As we look forward to 2017, we're looking to do sessions that help you solve your problems. And Reg 9 reviews are one of the problems that we hear from our clients. So I appreciate everybody taking part in all of the sessions in 2016. Everybody have a fantastic holiday. We'll be back with our first session near the end of January in 2017. And again, thank you very much and have a great holiday. Thank you, Leon.